Hello, my name is Jerry Wyrock. I'm a volunteer with the Lutheran Suicide Prevention Ministry that works to engage faith communities in saving lives that might be lost to suicide. Suicide has been a forever challenge to faith communities. However, the nature of that challenge is changing from one of confrontation to one of helping to save lives. As recently as 2008, representatives from faith communities came together to talk about the role of faith communities in suicide prevention. Representatives from Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Muslim traditions came together to wrestle with this question. At the end of the day, they issued a consensus statement about what these faith communities believed that they should be doing about suicide prevention. Let me read from that consensus statement for you. The time is right for the life-enhancing strengths that are the foundations of our most ancient faith traditions to find application in preventing suffering and loss from suicide. One of the life-enhancing strengths of the Christian tradition is the gift of the Holy Spirit. Last Sunday, Christian churches around the world celebrated this gift on Pentecost Sunday. The red colors you see behind me are part of that celebration of this gift. Other faith traditions have life-enhancing strengths of their own that can be brought to bear on suicide prevention. The magnitude of the problem of suicide is also changing, unfortunately, in the wrong direction. On April 23, 2016, the New York Times reported that suicide in the United States reached a 30-year high. From 1999 to 2014, suicide increased by an amazing 24% in the United States. In 2014, over 42,000 lives were lost to suicide. That made suicide the 10th leading cause of death in America. How can faith communities actively address the challenge to help save lives that might be lost to suicide? Recently, the Lutheran Suicide Prevention Ministry interviewed 5 leading national suicide prevention scientists. We asked them, what can faith communities do now to help prevent suicide? The following interviews give the answers that we received from these scientists. If you take away only one message from these interviews, please let it be that of Dr. Paul Quinetz when he said that suicide is not SEP. I say SEP, meaning someone else's problem. Suicide is a problem of the faith community too. Please join us in helping to save lives that might be lost to suicide. What, in your opinion, can we, as a country, including faith communities, do to stem this increasing tide of suicides?
Well, in my view, the first step has to be to get our heads out of what's called the SEP.
SEP?
SEP. That's someone else's problem. If it's someone else's problem, I have no obligation to do anything. And this is why the survivor movement, and you and your wife helped get this whole thing going by saying it isn't about something I don't know, somebody I don't know, somebody I don't love. It's about me and my family. And when America realizes that family members are losing family members at the rate they're losing them, They ought to stand up on their hind legs and demand change. I mean, we lose 30,000 men a year to cancer, prostate cancer, and 30,000 men a year plus to suicide. And the budget for prostate cancer is this tall, and the budget for male suicide is minuscule. It's pennies on $1 million debt. So first thing we have to do is embrace this as a human problem that's solvable and preventable. And it takes every one of us to pitch in to make it change and make it happen. And who do you train? We know who that is. It's the people already in your life, your 6 best friends. Most men have 7 close friends, intimate others. Women have 12 or 13. And those are the people, if you ask them, who in your life can counsel you, that you trust, that you believe in, that you have confidence in. And we're talking here about the faith community. If you ask that question of parishioners, who do they say? If it isn't your pastor, then you need a new pastor. This is why we've been appealing, like you have, to the faith community to say, you're the key player. There's 800 million hours of counseling is provided by pastoral counselors throughout the country a year. That was 10 years ago.
How many?
800 million hours. So who's in a position to be that potential rescuer? It's not a bystander. It's somebody already playing an important role in your life. First of all, I want to say that faith communities are already a very positive protective factor against suicide, in that communities of faith that support each other, where there's high connectivity, where there's a shared belief, where there is, if I can't make it to church, somebody's going to come by and pick me up, give me a ride, friendships, all of those, all the research shows that people who are actively involved in the community of faith are protected against suicide, from Mormons to you name them, and they're protected, provided the church itself is not, a cult of some kind, that's a suicidal leader. But so you already are in place to do that. What's the only piece that's missing, in my view, is how can we talk comfortably about this subject? Because a careful reading of the Old and New Testament doesn't condemn suicide. Suicide isn't condemned until St. Augustine's decision to make it a sin. And so I think pastors and faith leaders need to explore their Bibles. They need to discuss this and do what Reverend Jim Clemens, you and a friend of ours, who wrote that book, What Does the Bible Say About Suicide, so that some of that stigma starts to go away. It becomes a topic that can be talked about from in a sermon. It can be talked about as a health issue, because the journey to suicide is not just a physical, mental disorder journey. It's a journey of spiritual journey. It's a journey of loss of faith and loss of hope. And I thought that was the business that religions were in.
So here's where I'm connecting the dots with a faith community. You spend time with each other in communities, in families, at school, workplaces. These are the environments where if people knew to recognize the signs of deterioration in mental health, they could play a key role in making it safe and sensible. Just giving the message that, of course, you would take care of yourself if it were a physical health condition. That's usually not an issue in the church setting. And we need to learn to do the same for mental health conditions. I mean, I think that's at a very upstream. It doesn't necessarily automatically lead to a reduction in suicide, but it certainly is a starting place to change that culture around an openness to seeking help from a variety. That could be pastoral help, that could be a mentor, but certainly at key times that might be psychiatric or psychological help.
It always seems that the leaders of faith communities have so many other issues that are so vital, just like doctors have so many issues.
And like teachers, too.
Teachers, my plate's full. How do we engage these people?
I think you find the ones for whom, usually by tragedy or something smacking them right in the face, those blinders have been removed in terms of the critical nature of mental health and suicide risk for their own populations, for their own family members perhaps. And you gather them up, and I do have an eventual goal. We're not quite there yet because my plate is full, speaking of full plates for the next year. But I think if we make it easy on them in the sense of if we create some educational modules that are very user-friendly and that don't take a lot of, expense and time out of their schedules, but to help kind of rally an effort around that. It could start a bit of a movement in that.
I think the faith communities play a big role in terms of looking at suicide prevention. When we think about suicidal behavior as a societal problem, what that means, or at least how that translates to me, is that when it's a societal problem, you need all hands on deck to try to deal with the issue. You need the school systems, you need law enforcement, you need public health, you need clinicians, you need faith-based communities involved in the issue, because all of them have certain strengths, have certain tools, have certain access to communities, which is oftentimes one of the strengths of the faith-based community, so that you can get to people who sometimes don't know about the problem. Sometimes it's an awareness thing. Sometimes it is the tools that faith-based organizations have in terms of connectedness. That's a big deal in terms of thinking about, risk versus protection in terms of people with suicidal behavior, that when you feel more connected to a community, to a group, that oftentimes you're protected against suicide. So how can faith-based communities do some work to promote connectedness within congregations or even within the neighborhood where that faith-based community sits? So definitely faith-based communities have that opportunity to enhance connectedness. So definitely the faith-based communities have a critical role, along with what they call collaboration and partnerships with other organizations, with other institutions within our communities, to really try to move the ball forward, use another sports analogy, to move the ball forward in terms of making comprehensive approaches really happen in communities.
You use that term political will. I see that a good bit. And do you have any ideas of how we might marshal that political will and develop it and direct it to help us?
I see it as, it's encompassing at this point more than just kind of what people would consider traditional politics. So both formal leaders, which are generally might be encompassed in kind of government organizations, government positions, as well as informal leaders, which could be in organizations such as faith-based organizations, for instance, and getting them to support suicide prevention efforts, and so bringing to bear not only kind of financial resources, but also the type of resources that can't be measured in dollars, such as influence. So bringing influence to the table, bringing the finances to the table, bringing all of this willpower, the willpower of the community to get behind and support these types of efforts, is something that I would consider political will, something that can push forward the knowledge base and strategy.
Besides asking for more money, I think you can also be asking for and demanding that certain entities that we think should be responsible for improving care, for example, do it. Where is the demand side of service provision? How do we improve the quality of healthcare systems unless people are starting to ask for it? So I think as we have more awareness in the advocacy groups, not just for the funding that clearly is needed, but also improving the quality of what's out there and asking agencies that we think should be responsible for improving their care to do it. And that then kind of translates into the faith communities, where we know they offer a lot of support, a lot of care. They need to be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They need to be kind of upping their game in terms of the quality of what they deliver and their awareness of what can be done and how to connect people.
Is there any particular connection you might see between faith communities and reaching out to veterans? Dr. Crosby was saying connectedness is important and so on. It seems to me that there must be some way in which faith communities might even target that particular area of veterans. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's only limited to your imagination in terms
Really?
of what could be done, because all the issues you're speaking to, I would agree with. Their lack of belonging. Maybe they are dealing with their own mental health problems. Maybe they are not, and they're willing to help others.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
church provides that opportunity. Churches have been, able to provide job-seeking opportunities, support. There's all kinds of ways, I think, depending on what the issue is in your community and who's
Yeah.
there and what other organizations you can connect with.
Yeah.
I think there's great opportunity, and I think that's a great way for the public to become more aware of those issues and a way of being more accepting and appreciative of the service that veterans have done and understanding more about that.
Do you see any particular convener out there that might be someone who might be able to bring the leaders together and let's sit around this table and talk about this community problem and so on?
I would look to other social problems that have been, addressed that way, or even other health problems that faith communities. And I'm no expert on
Yeah.
interfaith organizations, but it seems like there would be a great opportunity. And I would also suggest that those faith communities even look within themselves to say, how healthy are we? And, the rostered members, how are they doing? Because we also know how devastating it can be when the leadership itself is not healthy in what it's doing. So, many rostered clergy often talk about their own struggles as an example. So there's many ways this can happen, and I think there's lots of examples, many opportunities around different, traditions and the calendar of those traditions to highlight things. It's kind of limited to your imagination, and I just would encourage whatever you can do to do that.
Preventing suicide is a particularly difficult problem. Suicide prevention scientists tell us that suicide is a rare event, meaning that in a population of 100,000 people, only 13 will die by suicide in a given year. Identifying those people to help prevent suicide is a huge challenge for suicide prevention researchers. There is hope, however. Depression has been found to be a common factor in the lives of those 13 people that do complete suicide. Now, that does not mean that people with depression are going to die by suicide, but the fact that depression has been present in the life of those who do die by suicide gives us a great starting point to search for those who are at risk. About 1 in 5 persons will deal with depression in their lifetime. But what is depression, and how does it impact the life of a person? In the following video, Jamaica-born Beth Sara Wright, PhD, tackles the tough questions of faith and depression, the stigma surrounding mental illness, and the role that telling your story has to play in the healing process of people dealing with mental illness. Beth Sara Wright has studied at Princeton, New York University, and Cambridge University. Her life journey has taught her that faith and depression can be a common struggle for many people, and she wants to share with you her battle with depression. Please listen to her now as she shares her story of how she has made meaning from this life situation. Beth Sara Wright is married to Robert C. Wright, the Episcopal Bishop of Atlanta. She and her husband are the parents of 5 children. Please take her message with you and to your congregation to help those dealing with depression.
Faith communities have an extremely important role in raising awareness and advocacy about suicide prevention and in terms of other mental health issues and concerns. More than anything, to hear from the faith community that God does not make mistakes, that to have a mental health issue, to have a mental illness, is just that, an illness, and not a consequence of who you are or what you've done or what you've thought or how you've lived your life or your behavior. It is not a consequence of that. It is simply an illness. An illness. And to hear from the faith community that that is what it is, and that healing is possible, and help is available, and that hope is eternal. To hear that from the faith community is remarkable and life-giving. And to know that you deserve abundant life because God promised it, and you can attain that by getting the help you need. How important is it for the faith community to say to people who may be suffering that indeed prayer is important, but the answer to prayer could be go to a doctor. The answer to prayer could be get the help you need. The answer to prayer could be you have an illness. Let's work with it. Do you want to get healed? We need to be able to say, it's okay, you have an illness. Let's get the help we need. To hear that from the faith community is so powerful, and it can save lives. Depression is not a result of a sin or a sinful life, or it is not something as a result of something you've done. You didn't bring this on. So to hear from people in the faith community, yes, let's work with this, is incredible. But what can the faith community do? First and foremost, that first step, one, yes, to have a conversation and to recognize that it is an illness, to educate the faith community that about mental health issues and what ways that can be addressed. That is important. We need to educate ourselves first to be able to help others and to recognize that first and foremost, it's an illness. Community, can you imagine the powerful force there is when different groups, different communities from different faith traditions are all saying the same thing? I don't believe there is any one faith tradition that says you need to live a broken life. The promises are the same. The promises are for whole lives, for wholeness, for joy. So what would it mean if we all said together, we partnered together, we worked together, interfaith dialogue to say the same thing? Remember, mental illnesses do not discriminate. They affect Jews, Muslims, Christians, people of all denominations. There is no discrimination. It is an illness, something we can all share. Imagine if we were all to say together, hope is available, help is available, healing is available, and we can work together to do that.